Okay, fantastic. Good morning, everyone. I'm wishing the day away already. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 SFMI program launch. So we're going to take you through the program that's going to go ahead for this year. That's going to include the normal activities that we have, the assessments, and the engagement activities. We're also going to introduce a couple of new areas that we've got for this year, which is the online assessments, and also talking about some wider disclosure as well for the criteria and the standard. So the speakers that we have today, we've got myself and Krista, my colleague from the SFMI. And we're also joined by Jaime Sullivan and Alison Forster from MOJ, and they're going to be talking about sustainability within MOJ, some of the challenges which they have from a stock of buildings that dates back a few hundred years up to present day, and it brings along a couple of challenges as well in managing them and meeting up with some of the government targets which they have. I'll introduce them in more detail as we come up to their area as well. So to run through the key bits which we'll run through today, I'll talk about an overview of the SFMI and a bit of information about some of the challenges that we've got coming up within the sector. And Kristen will take us through the programme review, and then Alison and Jaime will run through some information about the MOJ and the sustainability practices there. We should have about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions, please put them into the Q&A function. I'll ask any of the questions that you wish to ask for either ourselves and to MOJ. Okay, so if I crack on then about the SFMI and the programme for this year. So many of you will be aware who the SFMI is. For those of you who aren't aware, we're the only body that looks at sustainability focused towards the FM sector and very much targeting what does good practice look like for the sector from a materiality perspective. So that's looking at it in terms of what drives the sector forwards, both internally for ourselves, and that involves skills and competencies, the data management, and the ability to drive excellence in running and managing the facilities and the properties. But it's also how do we communicate that upwards towards management teams? So how do we align the practices that we have as FM to move the needle for senior management teams, so we get the interest of the CEO, the FD, etc., because what we do adds value to the company overall. So a lot of the way that we go about doing that is through direct engagement with partners, which is from both service providers as well as organisations as well. It's about showing what good practice looks like, but also warning signs. So we want to combat greenwashing and an open dialogue. And I think one thing that we're blessed with the partner group is the open, supportive nature that we have. And so partners do work with each other to help to manage some of their own challenges as well. So as a group, we do have most of the answers. Individuals may have some challenges and issues. And so that's where we broaden that out. So we have a series of membership levels. The assured and the premium partners are involved throughout the programme. They'll also be party to our assessments, and they'll receive at the end of it an award. And that award says that they've been through a rigorous assessment process to come out with a validated level of performance. So that level of performance has a standing as well within the community, because it means that we have looked at the details of how they operate, not a self-assessment process, but really looking at how they perform. We've also introduced a member level, and that will engage both SMEs as well as organisations who are coming along and developing, so it's in the early stages of implementing sustainability, and that will also link up with our online assessment activities. And then we have engagement partners as well. So we involve the likes of RICS, IWFM, IEMA in a lot of the programs and the works that we're involved in. And again, it's about extending and expanding out the role and the remit that we have towards the wider sector and the wider industry. And I've mentioned about the self-assessment tool a few times. So we're in the process of finalising the details of this. So it's looking at a series of questions. It's around about 50 or so multiple choice questions, around 12 ESG topic areas. And the intention of this is it does provide a self-assessment mechanism, and it does and simplifies the way of how we understand sustainability to be implemented. But also what it does do is it allows organisations to get a real feel for what does sustainability mean for them and what progressive steps do they need to be taken next. So the outputs of this is a roadmap and a set of actions about how organisations can progress that. And its desire is to act as a segue into the full SFMI audit framework. So we'd love organisations to start off with the assessment tool and move their way forwards towards the audit framework, so that provides the full validity. So looking at the SFMI, the programme that we have, we're very much focused this year on connecting together some of these key aspects. So whilst we have a range of programmes that are taking place that Kristen will take us through, the idea is that they're all interlinked in terms of the knowledge, the capacity building that they're intended to provide. So we have that community activity, learning lessons and sharing knowledge from across peer groups, but also bringing in individuals and experts from outside to feed into that. It's about ensuring that knowledge and awareness is captured and communicated. So what does it mean in terms of some of the regulatory activities, and how do we implement that so that we have a structured approach for achievement not only of compliance, but where it also adds value back to the business, but also that awareness of how do we have conversations with senior managers about some of these challenges that's affecting us and some of the risks and opportunities that are there. Looking at the assessments themselves, the knowledge that comes out of that, and again, the programme of improvement and the roadmap that's ahead, and the strategic support. So where that might be required as an add-on, as an extra, can leverage the wider expertise that the ECLAR advisory team have to be able to provide that tailored support. Yeah. And there's a huge amount of additional guidance that's available. So I've mentioned about the criteria, and that's had a revamp and a lot more additional detail that's been added to that. But what we've also done is looked at some specific activities. So there's a procurement guide that was developed a couple of years ago. There's a Scope 3 piece of work which was supported by a number of FM companies together with the likes of RICS, IMO and IWFM. That's gone out and that's now forming part of the net zero carbon building standard. So it's the end piece of getting through the entire life cycle of a building. So that activity itself has yielded that positive result in forming part of the whole life cycle carbon conversation. And so there's a huge range of benefits involved in the SFMI being part of the community of activities at whichever membership level that you come in at. And it's about engaging, it's about learning, but it's about having the confidence to be able to use that knowledge to then be able to better the organisation and the services that are being provided. So all of that becomes really important as we go through some of the global challenges which are taking place at the minute. And now is probably the perfect time to be involved in the SFMI, because a lot of the changes that are taking place, it adds uncertainty, but for the organizations that have implemented and have an understanding of what ESG means in their business, they are starting to make good traction and good move forwards. Wonderful piece of research that's been done recently by PwC, and they're talking now about having a differential that's taken place in the market for those organizations that have invested in ESG versus those that haven't. And that's measured both in terms of the valuation, but also in terms of the risk appetites as well. So we are starting to see now a difference in the way that those two groups of organizations, those that have invested versus those that haven't. And so some of the key changes that we are seeing, we have a regulatory reset that's happening at the minute. So across Europe, we've had the CSRD, the UK SRS and the Canadian SRS, as well as others. They've all taken a slight pause. Most of them are looking at having a trajectory which is extending timelines by a couple of years or so. Now, the rationale that sits behind that is to ensure that organizations have sufficient time to embed the requirements into their operational practices. And originally, the regulations had a 2-year time frame of a light touch approach to get involved as well. So this doesn't really change the timelines of when the regulator was going to go in and start to ask for full compliance to be developed and generated. And so our experience of being involved in implementations, these are typically 2 to 3 year cycles for the implementation, because it is at the senior level to get it fully involved. So do carry on and do continue to implement, but it's got to be done in a way that adds value to the business rather than being a tick box exercise, because that adds cost on without a benefit, whereas the true value comes in integrating it and understanding the benefits that are coming out from it. We've also had a big move by both investors and also the financial auditors around the doubling down on risk. So for this, we're starting to look at how both of those two bodies are starting to understand how you capture risk and how you communicate that. So organizations which are able to communicate the risk effectively for what they have and what's moving forwards generally takes a view that the organization is being well managed. It truly understands what's going on. And therefore, there's a good reflection in the way that the company is operating and managing itself. Where those risks aren't in place and aren't being captured, that does open questions about what else is left uncovered and not being reviewed and not being looked at. So again, part of this exercise is around that transparency and being able to put forward a dialogue and a communication about what risks looks like, but also the impacts and the implications. And the final area is around the data quality. And in order to be able to start talking about risk and talking about the implications for business and to engage any senior level, we've got to enable clear data to allow for decision making and to allow for forward trajectories to be made. And if that data isn't of sufficient quality, we don't have the ability of being able to provide that forecasting. And that's an area that is wholly within the control of the FM community. So how do we start to understand what's important in terms of data? And then also how do we ensure its robustness, but also where its caveats are as well. So this isn't an exercise of let's just collect as much data as we possibly can. It's a very targeted approach of collecting the correct information in the correct and consistent way, and then being able to use it. A key part of this is communication. So again, from our experience and what we've seen, a lot of the challenges is that individuals are unaware as to why they're collecting the data, and therefore make an assumption that it's not important, and they can just provide previous data or incorrect data that's coming through. So this is directly then connected to the way that we communicate the information as well, the training, the awareness that's in place as well. And this is, again, part of where the SFMI is coming in, saying some of the challenges that we have may not just be related directly to poor data quality, that is a symptom of another issue, which is generally around the engagement activities. So good quality data, what does that help with? That helps with huge amounts of the funding programs as well. Money is available for refurbishment projects. There are investors who have that money available that are asking for projects to be put forward to them. But because the data quality isn't there, it doesn't meet up with some of those thresholds to be able to take those projects forward. The risk levels are too great for an investor to get involved in them. So again, part of how we can deliver on a decarbonisation programme and other strategies involves improving that quality of data. So a very simple measure is if we can start to get towards that investment, it is a demonstration that the quality is there. So last year, the SFMI went through an exercise to look at what's the key themes and materiality assessment on the sector itself. And we're using these areas looking and driving forwards to say, if these are the key areas that's going to affect the FM sector, not just internally for the sector, but also looking at what it means for our customers, that's those working within the floor areas, senior managers that we engage with, if investors, etc., involved as well. If it moves the needle for those guys, how do we make sure that we capture the knowledge and the information, but also how do we make sure that we communicate it effectively? And that brings a whole suite of other things. That brings KPIs. It brings common standards of how we disclose, because by having that, we've got greater trust in the data, but also the businesses can have greater trust in the information we're providing. So the 4 areas that we're looking at revolve around decarbonisation. And that's the decarbonisation, not just the Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions, so things like natural gas, electricity, diesel, and fleet vehicles that might be being used for an organisation, but it also involves the Scope 3 activities of the supply chain that's being used to run the building as well, the embodied carbon of the building through the refurbishments, the projects that might be taking place as well. And we want to understand for all of that, how do we get towards that net zero? And in large cases, we'll understand some areas that are involved. We can purchase renewable electricity. We can move towards air source heat pumps or other forms of heating. We can look towards some changes in areas. But what do we do with some of the major capital projects that we have in place? And how do we look differently at how those happen? Because a 2050 timeline is well within line of sight now of a boiler replacement project to get us there. So we need to be thinking now further ahead for some of those areas and the funding requirements associated. Again, this fits nicely within the net zero carbon building strategy. There's a second area which looks at well-being, and this is well-being across the board as well. It's not just staff that's involved in the FM teams, the supply chains as well, but ultimately it's also the well-being of those working within the places that we're providing those services to. If those individuals are also happy, comfortable, there is less sickness levels, there is greater levels of engagement. And from that, there should also be a greater level of productivity that's starting to come through as well. So it's about understanding that linkage that we're starting to get between the well-being and the provisions of the services that FM does, and also that productivity link. There's some really good research that's currently taking place looking at the data linkage between those two. And it's looking at areas such as social value. It's been well in place. It's over 10 years now since the original Act came out. And we're getting towards the level where this is becoming quite mature. And its maturity is bringing positives in that it's well understood, it's communicated, people are engaged on board. but it's also in negatives in that it's now become a bit of a numbers game. Highest number wins. How do we get as much social value and how do we plug as much in there? Whether it happens and it takes place, whether it's long term, whether it's measured into the future, becomes a moot point because it's about the highest number that wins today. And does that actually help us when we start talking about social value, not just for the FM, but the aligned activities? The FM sector is one of the few sectors that can really change society, that can allow for social mobility to take place. So there's also a role for us to be able to challenge those norms, to say it isn't about numbers, but it is about change that takes place. And that's where the new Procurement Act enables some of those conversations to take place, but also helps public sector bodies to procure in a different way. And lastly, it looks at those risks and opportunities. So those risks cover things like climate risk. We have an understanding of what's going to happen. This year, we've had the driest March and April. There's already conversations of river levels being low, potential considerations of drought effects. So what happens if water isn't available for properties, etc.? What does that look like moving out into the future? We have other risks in terms of a workforce that's becoming aging, fewer individuals coming through. How do we replenish those individuals and those skill sets to be able to manage our buildings? How do we get that knowledge transfer coming through? But that also poses and provides us with huge opportunities, not just in the potential use of technology, but also bringing people in who have different ways of being able to provide and manage buildings, being able to engage and operate in a different structure and a different operations in order to provide the sustainable services that we're looking for. So these become the 4 areas that we're going to be taking forwards, because what we want to do is to develop these out, work with others within not just the FM sector, but also the building sector, to start to look at how do we measure this? What does good look like? And how do we help the sector move forwards to being able to provide service, not just for ourselves, but also that's recognised by senior managers as well. Yeah. So I'll hand over now to Kristen to run through the programme for this year. Kristen?
Great. Thanks, Sunil. That was really, really insightful. So I'm Kristen. I am managing the SFMI program for this year, and I just wanted to give a really brief overview of what we have planned for the next 12 months. So here we have a sort of basic timeline that covers some of the main events for the SFMI program. You can see that we have the launch webinar here in May, followed by the first Leaders Forum, which will be focusing on social value, as Sunil just mentioned. We also have our 22 criteria changes webinar, which is for our partners. Leaders Forum is for our partners and industry organizations, and the criteria changes webinar is also for our partners, and this just gives an overview of how the criteria have been slightly changed this year. Every year we try and improve the criteria, push the sort of level upwards to help encourage continuous improvement in sustainability, and that will take place in the beginning of June. We also have our Spotlight newsletters, which we release quarterly. So our next one will be coming out in July, and these give insights into the industry, deep dives onto particular topics, and also give regulatory updates. The initial desktop assessments prior to the audit assessment process, they will begin in late June, early July, and this is a really important preparatory stage for both us and for our SFMI partners. The audits themselves will take place in September through to October, followed by the report launch webinar. So following the audits and assessments, we will be awarding our SFMI winners, and we'll release a report based on our findings from this year. And that takes place in late December. We then present the scorecards to our SFMI partners from December through to late January. and we'll have our second Leaders Forum focusing on well-being in February of next year. This is just an overview of some of the main activities. We also have additional webinars, events. We have our toolbox talks, and there's lots of other resources for partners that will be ongoing throughout this 12-month cycle. So just a very brief overview of our plan for 2025. So we're really looking to grow the SFMI community over the next year. A big part of that is through the online assessment that Sunil mentioned. We're hoping to engage with smaller FM organizations or FMs that are just beginning their sustainability journey, and hoping to increase participation within the SFMI and to strengthen the SFMI's influence within the sector. We're also looking to enhance partner engagement, so offering more opportunities for partners to share insights, collaboration, and feedback. This is through events, webinars, and other collaborations that we have planned. Delivery of key insights. We have obviously numerous resources that we release regularly looking at particular topics, especially on the 4 key themes that Sunil mentioned. We're also hoping in the next year or two to release some new reports looking at the ambitions for sustainability within the FM sector, and also looking at practical decarbonisation pathways for the sector. Strengthening our knowledge and influence. So as I mentioned, there's the Leaders Forums, Toolbox Talks, newsletters, and other events and publications that we're hoping to utilize to increase awareness and knowledge within the SFMI, and also to provide greater visibility for sustainability leaders in FM. So these are the 22 criteria. They were 23 criteria, but this year we have refined them to be 22. Our 22 criteria report was just released today, so it's now on our website. And this year we really looked to increase the transparency of this report, to give a bit more insight into the assessment process for our SFMI partners. So this new report has lots of additional details around the criteria that were not previously released. So we have within each of the criteria, there are certain subtopics. So we've given a summary of those subtopics, as well as what is required to get to score a 5 on all of those subtopics, as well as examples of evidence that can be provided to demonstrate your sustainability credentials within these areas, and also a number of case studies to really help FMs achieve higher levels in the assessment process. As Sunil mentioned, community is one of the pillars. I've already touched upon this, but just wanted to highlight our next Leaders Forum will be on June 16th, I believe, and that will be focusing on social value. Prior to that, we will be releasing a toolbox talk on social value, so that our partners that join the webinar will be able to have a bit more understanding and knowledge of the different topics that we will be discussing. And then our next forum will be in February, and that will focus on well-being. Another one of the pillars that Sunil mentioned earlier is awareness. So it's really important to us that our SFMI partners stay up to date on the changing regulatory environment. They are able to get really important industry insights, as well as understand sort of best practices within the industry. So hopefully through our various partner resources, our partners are able to upskill themselves and their teams, and also stay abreast of all the changes in the sustainability world. So as I mentioned, we have our SMI Spotlight newsletter, which is quarterly. We have our Toolbox Talks, which we release throughout the year, depending on what's going on in the world and areas where, or topics that we think that FMs would most benefit from upskilling on. And we also have a number of case studies which give best practice examples that we get from our audit process. And this year we do also have an SFMI hub, which is a webpage where our partners can log in and have access to all of these materials and everything sort of all on one page, as well as updates on upcoming webinars, upcoming events, timelines, etc. And just very briefly, at the SFMI, we are part of a Cloud Advisory, which can offer a large number of additional services for FMs. We obviously have expertise in the FM industry, and we quite often work with FMs on additional pieces of work depending on what their needs are. So some of the areas that we often help FMs with are sustainable supply chains, Scope 3, disclosure and compliance, and GHG accounting. So if through the audit process or in the lead up to the audit process, you realize that there are some areas in your organization that could really do with some additional help, please do feel free to get in touch with us. And now I will hand over to our guests, Alison and Jaime, to talk us through their slides. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kristen, and good morning, everyone. So I'm Jaime Sullivan, Head of Sustainability at the Ministry of Justice, and with me today is Alison Forster, our Property Sustainability Transformation Lead. And we're here to talk about our approach to climate and sustainability transition. And of course, we support the use of SFMI, and it will become very obvious why, given how closely the criteria aligns with both our ambitions for the future and the challenges that we face right now. For those of you who don't know the department, or the MOJ for short, forgive me if I use the abbreviation, we provide the courts and tribunal services, legal aid, the public guardian, and of course we also protect the public through our prison service and probation service. Firstly, I thought we'd explain why we need to focus on both climate change and sustainability within the MOJ, and that's essentially because since 2022, climate and sustainability has been a principal risk to the organisation, and it's now managing that risk down that's driving the change.
Sorry, Jaime. Your microphone is very crackly.
Is it?
There's a lot of feedback. I don't know if there's something going on. We could hear you fine earlier.
It's fine this end, I'm afraid. Is that better?
Afraid not, but I think it's okay. It's very crackly.
I apologise to everyone. I'll try and resolve it as I'm speaking through. So we have a principal risk within the Ministry of Justice. We have physical risks from the changing climate, and that's primarily flooding and overheating, and that's impacting our operational resilience right now. And of course that will only grow as our summers become hotter and drier and our winters warmer and wetter as well. Sitting alongside those physical risks, we also have significant transition risks. We're seeing a host of new compliance obligations, and that's in the form of government policy, targets, strategies, not least legislation in response to the growing climate, nature and resource crises, but also post-Brexit legislation. And of course, there's increasing divergence in the devolved administration's approaches to environment and sustainability. And all these new obligations bring both significant operational and financial implications into the organisation, not least our decarbonisation exposure of getting to net zero 2050. And we also have significant technology risks. We are highly dependent on fossil fuels across our property portfolio and our fleet, and we know these fuels are being phased out, and that's a particular challenge for the MOJ, where despite our new net zero ready new prison programme that we're currently building, less than 1% of our assets are net zero ready for 2050. We're also concerned that we don't even know if the replacement technologies that we'll need to rely on, such as heat pumps, can they work effectively in our Edwardian courts or Victorian prisons? So big hurdles that we're needing to work through right at the moment. If I could have the first slide, please, Kristen, thank you. So to help us bring all of these risks under increasing control, this time last year we launched a climate and sustainability strategy in line with our greener justice vision, and that's all about using sustainability as an enabler of justice outcomes. So that's both building and managing a sustainable, rehabilitative, safe and secure prison estate, and it's about reducing reoffending, so it's supporting prisoners and offenders in developing green economy skills, and targeting our community payback on local environmental initiatives around the country. And also introducing digital services and smart courtrooms, ensuring court users have swifter access to justice. And we're also really clear that we need to be a greener government in terms of our operations. That's tackling climate change, both working towards net zero and importantly adapting to the changing climate. We need to improve our resource efficiency and have the ability to develop a circular economy. And we have a commitment to halting the decline in nature loss across our estate, which is key to getting nature recovery in place, but also helps ease the planning process of getting new prisons and prisons expansions in around the country. And finally, we're seeking to embed sustainability in everything we do. So that's considering the environment in our spending and policy decisions. It's embedding environmental risks within our key functions. It's moving to smarter working across the organisation. And it's also embedding those sort of appropriate, proportionate environmental requirements in our procurements. If I could have the next slide, thank you. So what does this mean for our facilities management and our partners regarding the environment? Well, in terms of tackling climate change, we obviously need to reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And now we're beginning to need to bring an equal sort of attention to our scope 3 emissions. So we've recently established an initial baseline, and our next step is to produce a reduction plan for the organisation and our value chain. And it was mentioned earlier, we also need to improve our data collection and our monitoring and our targeting of emissions right across the organisation, site by site across the ministry. And really that's all about helping us identify and cost and then deliver those most beneficial interventions that help us work towards net zero 2050. In terms of climate adaptation, we need to embed improvements, interventions and preventative measures, so reducing overheating and reducing flooding problems across the whole department as it's beginning to affect every aspect of our operations, whether that's court sitting days in the summer due to overheating or prison capacity in the winter during flooding season. But it also affects our supplies and of course the welfare of our court users and then our prison offenders and our staff and our visitors across the whole organisation. In terms of resource efficiency and waste, prisons are in a unique position to support circular economy principles. It'll probably surprise you, it did me, but we are the biggest manufacturer of textiles within the UK, and if we're not the biggest, we're definitely one of the biggest consumers of vapes, TVs and telephones. So we have a responsibility to try and repair, reuse, recycle waste wherever they arise, because we just produce such a significant amount. In terms of nature recovery, we have 9 principles within a nature recovery plan, and it includes standard things like greening our FM operations and providing space for priority habitats, pollinators, key species across the estate, but also getting prisoners and offenders engaged with nature as well. Next slide, please. In terms of social sustainability, our priorities are to improve justice outcomes, whilst also delivering environmental outcomes right across the nation. So we have a particular focus on developing green skills and jobs, where we're trying to help offenders enter the green economy on their release, particularly ex-offenders in jobs, in green economy jobs or any jobs. That significantly reduces their likelihood of reoffending and helps the justice system be more sustainable. So our probation service work with partners like the Canals and River Trust and Forster England, and they offer offenders training and new skills while working on projects, whether that's cleaning canals, coppicing trees, tree planting, so delivering local improvements right across the nation. And our prison industries have many workshops that provide a lot of meaningful activity and experience, but also qualifications in sort of green economy related jobs. So we manufacture LEDs at 3 prisons and roll those out across our estate. We have 9 tree nurseries growing 200,000 trees a year that gets planted on both our own estate, but also the MOD and the Environment Agency. And we repair TVs and phones for reuse, and they actually have about an 80% success rate at repair, and it's becoming multi-million-pound savings in deferred procurement costs, where we're not having to buy new TVs and phones continually across the organisation. But we're also concerned about the health, safety and welfare of our prisoners and staff. One particular area is helping prisoners and prison officers develop green space, as research shows that this materially reduces violence, assaults and self-harm incidents. So we have big programs of installing orchards and ponds across every prison, across our custodial estate. Next slide, please. But all this wouldn't be possible without the right governance and management approaches in place, which ensure all of this change is embedded across the department. So we really prioritised our risk management and embedded climate risk within our agencies and functions. As we already know, we have significant flood risk. 47% of our prisons have a high, very high flood risk. We had 18 flood events this autumn-winter flood season across our prisons and courts, resulting in the loss of court sitting days, prison cells, we lost site access, power supplies, that kind of thing. So it's really critical that we begin to bring these risks under control. And we also have significant overheating risks. A third of our estate is Victorian urban prisons. They have a huge high thermal mass and unfortunately poor ventilation. And that means during hot temperatures and heat waves, our actual in-cell temperatures can be 5 degrees hotter than the external heat wave temperature. It gets particularly worse through the night as well as the heat builds up. And then those cells can retain those temperatures for up to 5 days after the heat wave event has actually passed. The bit that really concerns us, of course, is that we know that as temperature rises, particularly it's at over 28 degrees, we've done a bit of research, we see a significant spike in the incidence of violence within prisons. So it's really critical we get our heads around this. And we also have significant financial exposure to our energy spend. It's doubled to 200 million over the last few years. And of course, we'll need to spend hundreds of millions of pounds every year just to reach net zero by 2050, which is just around the corner, as was said earlier. So to help hold ourselves to account, we piloted TCFD, one of a handful of government departments, and that was all about ensuring that we were introducing the right board oversight and the management action behind everything, so that we've got a real handle on our climate risks, plans and performance going forward. And to support that change and try and embed it in our decision making across the organisation, we introduced impacts of spend assessments on carbon, climate adaptation and nature for all of our major projects and our policies, to ensure that we're properly accounting for any environmental costs and benefits equally, but also those externalities on the wider society in our spending decision making, which was just introduced last year. And finally, it's probably worth saying we're really keen to support increasing diversity in the environment profession, and we recently signed up to the Diverse Sustainability Initiative to help us work with offenders and getting them into the environment and sustainability profession. I'm actually going to hand over to Alison now for the next slide to give a little case study of where, and it's a great example of where all of these elements of our Green Justice vision have been brought together. Alison?
Thanks, Jamie. So we thought we'd just finish on a little case study, as Jamie's just mentioned, with provides a great example of where all our elements of greener justice are coming together. Over the last few years, we've steadily been moving towards building greener and greener prisons, and HMP Millsike is the one that I'm mainly going to focus on this morning. It's part of our new prison programme, just opened last month, and that's our greenest prison to date. It's first of 4 new build prisons to be opened as part of the pledge to create an extra 14,000 prison places by 2031. It's an all-electric design, eliminating the need for fossil fuel heating, and it's predicted to deliver a 67% reduction in operational energy use, 75% reduction in carbon emissions, and a 15% reduction in water, and also an 11% benefit to nature. It's used a design for manufacturing assembly approach. 80% of the parts are standardised off-site and fitted together on-site. And we've had a number of prisoners working on temporary release during the construction. It's designed with more rehabilitative, smaller accommodation wings, wider corridors, as Jamie's mentioned, about behaviour and the research. The wider corridors help flow rate within the prisons. We've got local training rooms and workshops, and as Jamie's referred to, significant green space. And it's been designed for easy retrofit cooling as the climate changes. All of the plant equipment's on the roof, and we've got 5 substations there, 8 attenuation tanks, 1,843 PV panels. It's part of PV renewable energy and part grid. And we've also got one of our house blocks geared up for digital twin, which we'll be using to learn from. It's a privately operated prison. Mighty's the operator. And I wanted to speak to you a bit about the terms of social value. So Kia were the contractor. They appointed a very good social value coordinator, which is something that we'll be looking for in our next 3 new build prisons. And they did employ 44 release on temporary licence prisoners, and 29 of those prison leavers were employed on site during the build. Kia did some analysis afterwards, and really pleased to say that 85% of the Rottle prisoners were still in employment after the release mark, which was really good news. And we believe somewhere in the region of 600 jobs were being created for the operational phase of Millsike as well. And I just want to leave you with a quote from one of those prisoners who gained qualifications through the Open University. I think it was as a chartered surveyor. And he was employed by Kia. And what he'd said was, if you'd have said to me in my darkest times that this is where I'd end up just 7 months post-release, I'd have said there's no chance. I couldn't have done it without the support. And as Jamie's alluded to previously, it's really important to us that we rehabilitate and do our best to ensure that our prisoners get employment once they're released. And this is a really good way that we can help with that. So have you got anything to add at the end there, Jamie?
No, just to say, yes, thank you for giving us the time to speak. I don't know if we have any time for any questions, but we'll gladly take a few if there is. Over to you, Kristen.
Great. Thank you so much, Beth. That was really insightful, and yeah, great to get a look at all the amazing work that the MOJ is doing. So now we are moving to the Q&A portion of the webinar. We have about 10 minutes or so. So if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the question box. I have received one question for the MOJ already. So Jamie, Alison, it's just a general question around how do you look to your FM providers to help support you in your ESG goals?
Yes, they are critical. They are part of our value chain for our prisoners and our staff users, essentially. We need to work collectively to work to what are really stretching government targets now, and in response to the different crises. So it's not just standard employer requirements and contract management, that kind of thing. It's helping us identify the opportunities, helping us cost things up, and of course helping us deliver them in practice as well. So it's maybe a bit of a step change over the next few years in our approach, but it's much more about working together rather than working as 2 separate entities.
Great, thank you. I have another question that I think could probably be answered by both Sunil and both yourself, Jamie, which is essentially like, how can a company balance cost-driven contracts and the push for sustainable service delivery?
Yeah. Jaime, do you want to take that first?
Yeah.
It's an excellent question, isn't it? So we're all about making the better business case at the moment. So we've introduced what's called a key holder process within the Ministry of Justice. So for our big programs and major projects, people like our property function, our digital function, us as a climate function, get to scrutinize business cases so that we can try and secure the best amount of investment money for whatever project it is we're investing in. And that means fully accounting for energy, carbon emissions, costs, but not just internally within the organization, but externally into society as well, because we're asking for public funds in the majority of cases. So this is about us having the best possible business case to do that. So we also bring in climate adaptation. So we're looking at our flood cost exposure. We're modeling that over the next 30 years. We're beginning to understand what our costs of remediation or business continuity might be on any one site, and we can start bringing those costs in to secure a better level of investment. And we do the same for nature and natural capital as well. So it's bringing in a much wider set of benefits, costs that help us really make the best case possible. That's allowing us, and it really has, it allowed us to secure the investment we needed to build net zero ready prisons. The HMP Mill site is the first example. That brought in, I think it was nearly 100 million extra from Treasury, but we're also going through a property transformation program at the moment, and bringing in those environmental costs and benefits has enabled us to develop quite detailed specs on what we want on environment. Subject to that being approved with final funding, but they're in there at the moment. So it's really key that we inform decision making in the first instance that then can flow through into the program or project.
Yeah,
so now I'll hand over.
And I think from an SFMI perspective, a lot of what we're looking at is about how do we have shared values and shared goals and targets that we're trying to achieve. And those have to both recognise that supply chain needs to make a profit, a reasonable profit, and have manageable delivery programs, but also the FM teams has to manage within its own budgets and within the constraints that exist for the business. Those will change over time as well. So on any contract, 2-year, 3-year, 5-year contract, those will change. So the flexibility that allows a bit of movement in there as well helps you keep your eye on the ball in terms of what's important and what's going to move the needle, but you've also got the ability of being able to change around. And if that means that there's tweaks in the budgeting to allow that, some foresight in terms of being able to develop that and move that forward. So I think it is, a lot of that is about the relationship, and a lot of that is about having a structure that allows for flex to be built in.
Great, thank you. I have another question that I think could be applied to both of you as well, and I'd be also interested to hear Jaime's perspective on this. But the question is, what are the most common ESG blind spots you see in FM companies today?
I think one of the challenges that we have is the FM sector is a laggard in general in the delivery of ESG. So there's a lot of progress and a lot of movement that needs to take place to get the FM sector up towards where it can operate and what its opportunities are. So there's a lot of upskilling that's needed. There's a lot of, I think there is the capacity that's there, but it's about driving that forwards. The gaps that we start to see is, and unfortunately we're seeing an increase in the level of greenwashing that's taken place. Organisation statements around being climate neutral, but not necessarily capturing very much of what their impacts are. And those are the sorts of things that we also need to challenge. And again, it's going, the reasons for that is it gets through on supply chain questions and it gets you down selected. And that's the reason for it. So actually, let's challenge our procurement colleagues as well about how they make those selections. So those are the blind spots tend to be driven by a need and a reason for doing it. And I think it's starting to tackle the reason behind it. I think the capacity, the ability for the sector to learn and to adapt was shown during COVID. That is a beautiful example of the power of what FM can be for positive change and positive good. It's about how do we harness that as well in the direction we want to go.
I think that's right, Tanil, isn't it? There's in the past, the FM industry as a whole has been up at the top in terms of environmental change. There's an urgency that's come around especially on climate and climate risk over the last 3 or 4 years, and other sectors are now running away with that and beginning to get a real understanding. And I think there's an element of now FM stepping up to some extent with its clients. but also bringing a priority to it in the delivery of services with your client. That's exactly it.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions that we have. Sunil, Jamie, I don't know if you had any questions for each other or for in general, but yeah.
Just to say thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about our ambition, and yes, we're very supportive of SFMI.
Yeah.
Great.
Fantastic. And from the SFMI side, yeah, we look forward to working with you guys over the year.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope this has been a helpful webinar. We will be sending out a recording as well as a link to our 22 criteria report following the webinar later on today. And please do feel free to get in touch if you have any questions or are interested in learning more about the work that we do.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks.